Today I'm going over the section in chapter 8 called The Body as Means or End. Attitudes toward the body are attitudes toward attack. To the ego, the body is to attack with. Equating you with the body, it teaches you that you are to attack with. The body, then, is not the source of its own health. The body's condition lies solely in your interpretation of its function. Functions are part of being since they arise from it, but the relationship is not reciprocal. The whole does define the part, but the part does not define the whole. Yet to know in part is to know entirely because of the fundamental difference between knowledge and perception. In perception, the whole is built up of parts that can be separate and reassembled in different constellations. But knowledge never changes, so its constellation is permanent. The idea of part-whole relationships has meaning only at the level of perception, where change is possible. Otherwise, there is no difference between the part and the whole. Okay, so this first paragraph is describing to us how the body's function is for attack. That's the whole point of the body, is to feel that you can attack and be attacked with bodies. So that's why it's saying the body is not a source of health. And he's not talking about physical health, he's talking about the health of our mind, our peace or lack thereof. And it's belief in the body that causes a lack of peace. Now, he's not telling us to feel guilty or bad about our bodies. He's telling us here that the body's condition lies solely in your interpretation of its function. So we can use this tool of our body for awakening as well. But when we are perceiving with ego, we are using the body for attack. So when he's saying the whole does define the part, but the part does not define the whole, that means our wholeness of what we really are does define our little part, our piece, our little separate ego that we think we are, because the ego doesn't really exist. So we really are that wholeness and that oneness. But he's saying the part does not define the whole, meaning that split off part that we believe we are as ego does not define our whole as spirit. And then he says, yet to know in part is to know entirely because of the fundamental difference between knowledge and perception. So each one of us who appears to be a part is really the whole. The wholeness equals knowledge, and the belief in separation is perception, because we perceive either with ego or spirit within this illusory world. So it's our perception that is going to decide which teacher we are experiencing this illusion with. And when we choose to perceive with ego, we will experience suffering. He continues to use more fancy words to describe how when we perceive with ego, we will feel separate and we will feel pain. But when we perceive with spirit, we will be experiencing our wholeness. It's how we perceive that allows change. That's where change is possible, is with our perception. He's saying otherwise, there is no difference between the part or the whole, because in truth, there is no difference. In truth, we are all one, but the change that we need because we are perceiving incorrectly is to perceive correctly. That's how the change happens, even though in reality, nothing has ever changed. It's just our perception that needs to change. The body exists in a world that seems to contain two voices fighting for its possession, right? Ego and spirit. In this perceived constellation, the body is seen as capable of shifting its allegiance from one to the other, making the concepts of both health and sickness meaningful, right? It seems like we have two choices. Sickness would be choosing ego, and health would be choosing spirit. The ego makes a fundamental confusion between means and end, as it always does. Regarding the body as an end, the ego has no real use for it because it is not an end, right? Making the body real doesn't bring us anything. The ego thinks it's all about the body and is using the body as a means to an end, but there is there is no end. What are you going to get from that? You're eventually going to decay, and you're eventually going to die and then be reincarnated and do it all over again. There is no end. You must have noticed an outstanding characteristic of every end that the ego has accepted as its own. When you have achieved it, it has not satisfied you. Right? So he's even talking about all the things we think we're achieving or accomplishing with our bodies in our lifetime. He's saying even when you appear to do those things, they still don't satisfy you. Nothing ever satisfies the ego. That is why the ego is forced to shift ceaselessly from one goal to another so that you will continue to hope it can yet offer you something. Right? The ego's motto is seek and do not find. Once we're dissatisfied with one thing, we're like, oh, now I'm going to go do this other thing. That'll make me happy. And we just keep doing it again and again and again. And this is why typically people who are a bit older in their ego bodies will be attracted to the messages of the Course, because we've already lived a lot of years and a lot of life of doing all this achieving and doing all these ego goal-oriented things, and we see that none of it satisfied us, that none of it brought us happiness, that none of it brought us peace. So that's why we can eventually understand these messages after we've tried the ego thing for quite a few decades. All right, so that's why the ego wants us to stay real busy with worldly stuff so that we don't notice that we're never satisfied and we just keep chasing those ego dreams. It has been particularly difficult to overcome the ego's belief in the body as an end because it is synonymous with the belief in attack as an end. The ego has a profound investment in sickness. If you are sick, how can you object to the ego's firm belief that you are not invulnerable? This is an appealing argument from the ego's point of view because it obscures the obvious attack that underlies the sickness. If you recognize this and also decided against attack, you could not give this false witness to the ego's stand. All right, those are just tricky, twisty, turny words to talk about how the ego keeps distracting us all the time with all these ego desires, chasing after things within the world, so that we don't notice that we're choosing sickness, that we don't notice what we are doing to ourselves. It wants us to keep moving and staying real busy all the time and keep chasing so that we don't stand still and notice that we've got it all backwards. It is hard to perceive sickness as a false witness because you do not realize that it is entirely out of keeping with what you want. So we keep choosing sickness and we don't even realize that's what we're choosing and that it's not what we actually want. We don't even notice it. This witness then appears to be innocent and trustworthy because you have not seriously cross-examined him. The ego is the witness he's talking about, and we have not seriously cross-examined him. If you had, you would not consider sickness such a strong witness on behalf of the ego's views. A more honest statement would be that those who want the ego are predisposed to defend it. Well, ain't that the truth, right? This is what egos are doing all the time, defending themselves. Therefore, their choice of witnesses should be suspect from the beginning. So the ego will try to find more witnesses to back up its reality. The ego does not call upon witnesses who would disagree with its case, nor does the Holy Spirit. So the ego isn't going to go find things that disagree with it or disprove that the ego's real. Nor does the Holy Spirit, meaning the Holy Spirit does not disagree with its case, that we are spirit and we are whole. I have said that judgment is the function of the Holy Spirit and one he is perfectly equipped to fulfill. So judging correctly is Holy Spirit's function, to help us judge correctly. And Holy Spirit is perfectly equipped to teach us who and what we really are. Why? Because we are one with Holy Spirit. It is who and what we already are. We just forgot because we are blocking our truth. So our truth is just waiting for us, just like Holy Spirit just waits for us to listen. The ego as a judge gives anything but an impartial judgment, right? The ego's judgment is not impartial. When the ego calls on a witness, it has already made the witness an ally, right? The ego just wants to keep proving that it's real and proving that the world is real. It is still true that the body has no function of itself because it is not an end. So in reality, the body has no function in itself because the body is not even real. The ego, however, establishes it as an end because, as such, its true function is obscured. This is the purpose of everything the ego does, right? What is the purpose of everything the ego does? To block love, to block God's love, to block us from perceiving our reality, which is spirit. That's the ego's entire job. Its sole aim is to lose the function of everything. Right? It wants us to be completely lost and not understand our real function, which is to extend love eternally. A sick body does not make any sense. It could not make sense because sickness is not what the body is for. Sickness is meaningful only if the two basic premises on which the ego's interpretation of the body rests are true. That the body is for attack and that you are a body. Without these premises, sickness is inconceivable. All right? He's not just talking about physical sickness, he's talking about the sickness of our mind. Sickness is a way of demonstrating that you can be hurt. It is a witness to your frailty, to your vulnerability, and your extreme need to depend on external guidance, right? The ego wants us to believe that we are weak and vulnerable and subject to attack and pain and death, and that we have no power because we are weak and we need external guidance, that our guidance isn't within, that it's without, it's coming from the world. That's what the ego wants us to believe. The ego uses this as its best argument for your need for its guidance, right? It meaning not just your own ego, but all the other egos out there, which, by the way, there's only one ego because there's only one of us. There's one mistake that our one mind made to appear to make one ego. So the ego wants us to believe that we need to depend on egos for guidance. It dictates endless prescriptions for avoiding catastrophic outcomes, right? We feel as egos that we need to protect ourselves. The Holy Spirit, perfectly aware of the same situation, does not bother to analyze it at all. If data are meaningless, there is no point in analyzing them. He just means the world is false. There's no reason to analyze a dream. There's no need to analyze an illusion. The function of truth is to collect information that is true. Nothing the ego has to offer or the world has to offer is true. Any way you handle error results in nothing. Why? Because the error is also nothing. It's an endless loop. It just keeps you stuck in the ego loop of nothingness. The more complicated the results become, the harder it may be to recognize their nothingness. But it is not necessary to examine all possible outcomes to which premises give rise in order to judge them truly. All right. So that just means that the ego makes things very complicated on purpose so that we get confused by all the complication. We don't see the forest through the trees, basically. That's the ego's goal. A learning device is not a teacher. It cannot tell you how to feel. You do not know how you feel because you have accepted the ego's confusion, and you therefore believe that a learning device can tell you how you feel. So because we're so confused, we think our ego, our body, that perception is telling us how we feel. But it's not, because it's not real. And it's telling us a lie. Sickness is merely another example of your insistence on asking guidance of a teacher who does not know the answer. meaning the ego. And again, he's not just talking about physical sickness, he's talking about the sickness of our mind. The ego is incapable of knowing how you feel. When I said that the ego does not know anything, I said the one thing about the ego that is wholly true. Oh, Jesus, he's so funny. So that's his fancy way of saying that the only thing that's true about the ego is that it has no knowledge. It knows nothing. You might well ask how the voice of something that does not exist can be so insistent. Have you thought about the distorting power of something you want, even if it's not real? There are many instances of how what you want distorts perception. No one can doubt the ego's skill in building up false cases. Nor can anyone doubt your willingness to listen until you choose not to accept anything except truth. When you lay the ego aside, it will be gone. The Holy Spirit's voice is as loud as your willingness to listen. It cannot be louder without violating your freedom of choice. This is why Holy Spirit does not force the issue, because we have free will, which the Holy Spirit seeks to restore, never to undermine. So Holy Spirit speaks to restore our freedom of choice, for us to understand that we have a choice and then to choose spirit. That is what Holy Spirit seeks to restore. The Holy Spirit teaches you to use your body only to reach your brothers, so he can teach his message through you. Okay, to simplify, what he's saying in this section so far is that spirit is the only thing that's real. It's not going to force us to know that. We need to be willing to listen. That's how we discover who and what we really are. Ego is false. It will constantly be trying to trick us and deceive us into believing in its reality. And that brings us sickness of our mind, which can and will eventually lead to sickness of the body. But remember, the body's just a tool. It's not even here. And now he's telling us that the only use for the body within the illusion that is right-minded and that will heal us is forgiveness. That's why he's saying that the Holy Spirit teaches you to use your body only to reach your brothers, right? Only for practicing forgiveness, only for using the correct perception within your own mind to see yourself and everyone else as spirit. This will heal them and therefore heal you. That's it. That's what practicing forgiveness is. That's how we wake up from this dream. Everything used in accordance with its function as the Holy Spirit sees it cannot be sick. Everything used otherwise is. So everything of spirit is not sick, and everything that's not of spirit is sick. Do not allow the body to be a mirror of a split mind. Another way of saying don't believe in the ego's perception of separation. Do not let it be an image of your own perception of littleness. Do not let it reflect your decision to attack. Health is seen as the natural state of everything when interpretation is left to the Holy Spirit, who perceives no attack on anything. Health is the result of relinquishing all attempts to use the body lovelessly. How do we do that? By believing in ego. Anytime we are believing in ego or this illusory world in any way, we are believing in our littleness and we are using the body lovelessly. Health is the beginning of the proper perspective on life under the guidance of the one teacher who knows what life is. That's Holy Spirit, being the voice for life itself. More beautiful words to remind us that when we identify with Holy Spirit, we are healing our sick mind. As long as we believe in the ego, as long as we believe in separation, as long as we believe in this world, our mind is sick because it appears to have split. So the way to heal it is to focus on truth, which is spirit. And we do this by practicing forgiveness, which once again means overlooking the world of illusion, knowing it's not really there, and using your spiritual sight to see spirit in everyone and everything around you whenever you can remember to do so. Keep practicing.